If you've landed here tonight, welcome. Whether you're coming home after a long, exhausting day at work, or maybe it's your day off, and you're just looking for a gentle way to wind down. Maybe you're a student, your mind still racing from everything you had to absorb today. Or perhaps you're simply lying there, hoping that sleep will come a little easier this time. Whatever brought you here, I'm really glad you came. You don't have to do anything right now. Just allow yourself this quiet moment. Let go of the tension in your shoulders. Breathe in and out. You're safe here, and you're not alone. My only job tonight is to keep you company, to speak softly while you close your eyes, and to gently guide your mind away from the noise of today, into something far away and strangely beautiful. Tonight, we're going back almost 2,000 years. We'll find ourselves on the windy shores of ancient Gaul, where waves roll in and out, and where something truly unusual once happened. In the year 40 AD, the Roman Emperor Caligula, known for his eccentric, unpredictable behavior, made a decision that still puzzles historians to this day. He declared war on the sea. Yes, the sea itself. But don't worry, I'll tell you everything, slowly and calmly. All you need to do is listen and drift. Let your imagination take over now. Let the world grow soft around you. And when you're ready, we'll begin. And if this quiet moment brought you any comfort, if you enjoy drifting off with stories like this, softly told and gently explored, feel free to leave a like or subscribe. That way, I can keep you company again tomorrow night with a new journey through the forgotten corners of history, and maybe help make your evening just a little bit lighter. Chapter 1. Imperial Ambitions and Frustrations. Picture yourself in the marble corridors of the Imperial Palace in Rome, where the young Emperor Caligula paces restlessly through chambers adorned with the spoils of conquest from across the known world. The year is 39 AD. Then Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, known to history by the diminutive nickname Caligula, meaning little boots, has ruled the Roman Empire for just over a year, inheriting the vast apparatus of imperial power at the tender age of 24. The palace itself stands as a testament to Roman power and sophistication, its halls decorated with frescoes depicting the triumphs of previous emperors, its walls hung with tapestries woven from silk that has traveled the length of the known world from the mysterious lands beyond the Himalayas. Bronze statues line the corridors, their surfaces polished to mirror brightness, while the air carries the subtle fragrance of incense imported from Arabia Felix, the blessed land where aromatic treasures grow wild in hidden valleys. Imagine yourself observing this scene, watching as Caligula examines detailed maps spread across marble tables that have been inlaid with precious stones forming intricate patterns that seem to mirror the constellations themselves. These cartographic masterpieces represent the accumulated geographical knowledge of centuries of Roman exploration and conquest, their coastlines traced by the careful hands of surveyors who have risked their lives to chart the furthest reaches of the empire's dominion. His fingers, adorned with rings bearing the seals of imperial authority, trace the coastlines of Britain, that mysterious island beyond the northern seas that had captured Roman imagination for generations. The maps show the island as a land of mists and mysteries, its interior marked with notations about fierce tribes, vast forests and mineral wealth that had tantalized Roman merchants since the time of Julius Caesar's first tentative probes across the Channel, nearly a century before. The emperor's eyes, described by contemporary observers as unnaturally bright and intense, gleam with ambition as he envisions the glory that would come from conquering this distant land. His imagination fills with visions of triumph parades through Rome's streets, of British chieftains in chains, of vast treasures flowing into imperial coffers, and most importantly, of his own name, inscribed alongside those of the greatest conquerors in Roman history. The conquest of Britain represents more than mere territorial expansion in Caligula's fevered imagination. It symbolizes the completion of Julius Caesar's unfinished business, the vindication of Roman superiority over barbarian resistance, and the demonstration of his own worthiness to wear the purple of imperial authority. The young emperor sees himself as the instrument of destiny, chosen by the gods to extend Roman civilization to the very edges of the world. You can almost feel the electric tension in the air as Caligula's advisors gather around him, their togas of finest wool rustling softly as they lean forward to examine the plans that their emperor has been developing with characteristic intensity. These men, seasoned veterans of imperial administration and military command, watch their young ruler with a mixture of admiration and growing concern as his enthusiasm threatens to override their cautious counsel. The emperor speaks with growing excitement about the riches that await beyond the turbulent waters, of Celtic gold mined from hidden veins in British mountains, of slaves whose strength would build greater monuments to Roman glory, of pearls harvested from northern seas, and of the eternal fame that would cement his legacy among the greatest of Roman rulers. His voice carries the confidence of absolute power, the certainty of a man who has never known defeat and cannot conceive of failure. These dreams of conquest are not merely the fantasies of an inexperienced youth. Reports from traders and diplomats paint Britain as a land of extraordinary wealth, where metal workers craft ornaments of surpassing beauty, where warriors wear armor decorated with precious stones, and where druids are said to possess knowledge of arts that Roman scholars can barely comprehend. The island represents the ultimate prize for an emperor seeking to prove his worthiness to rule the world. The strategic arguments for invasion are compelling to minds trained in the arts of war and statecraft. Britain's position off the Gallic coast makes it a potential refuge for enemies of Rome, a launching point for raids against Roman territories, and a symbol of incomplete conquest that diminishes imperial prestige. Moreover, the island's tribal conflicts offer opportunities for Roman intervention, divide-and-conquer tactics that have proven successful throughout Gaul and Germania. The preparations for this grand invasion consumed the imperial court through the warm months of 39 AD, transforming the machinery of Roman administration into an instrument focused entirely on the logistics of projected conquest. Picture the bustling activity as thousands of soldiers are mustered from across the empire, their orders carrying the imperial seal that commands instant obedience from the Rhine to the Euphrates. The bureaucratic effort required to organize such an expedition strains even Roman administrative capabilities. Scribes work through the night, preparing requisitions for weapons, armor, ships, and supplies. Accountants calculate the costs of moving entire legions across hundreds of miles of territory. Engineers design siege equipment capable of breaching British fortifications, while architects plan the construction of harbors and supply depots that will support extended operations in hostile territory. The steady tramp of marching feet echoes through Roman streets as legion after legion makes its way northward toward the coast of Gaul, their movement coordinated with the precision that has made Roman military organization the envy of the known world. Each legion represents years of training and discipline, thousands of men whose lives have been dedicated to the service of Rome, and who now find themselves marching toward what promises to be the greatest adventure of their military careers. Supply trains stretch for miles along the great Roman roads, loaded with weapons forged in the workshops of skilled armorers, siege equipment designed by the finest engineers, and provisions calculated to sustain an army through months of campaigning in territory where local resources cannot be relied upon. The wagons groan under loads of grain from Egypt, wine from the hillsides of Italy, oil from Spain, and salt meat preserved according to techniques perfected through generations of military experience. Imagine yourself standing among the crowds that gather to watch these martial processions, feeling the excitement and apprehension that accompanies any great military enterprise. The sight is magnificent, row upon row of disciplined soldiers in gleaming armor that reflects the Mediterranean sun, their red cloaks flowing behind them like rivers of blood, their standards bearing the proud symbols of legions that have conquered from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. The soldiers themselves represent the finest military force the world has ever seen, men recruited from across the empire and trained in fighting techniques that combine individual skill with coordinated tactical movement. Their equipment, from the distinctive lorica segmentar that protects their torsos, to the gladi that hang at their sides, represents centuries of evolution in military technology, each piece tested in actual combat and refined through the experience of countless campaigns. The air fills with the metallic ring of weapons as thousands of men adjust their gear for the long march ahead, the creak of leather as horses shift under their loads, and the rhythmic chanting of military songs that have accompanied Roman armies since the days when the city was merely one among many Italian settlements. These martial melodies, passed down through generations of soldiers, serve both to maintain marching rhythm and to reinforce the esprit de corps that makes Roman legions virtually invincible in organized combat. Citizens line the streets, some cheering with the enthusiasm that accompanies any display of Roman power, others watching with the quiet concern of those who understand the true cost of imperial ambition. Veterans of previous campaigns recognize the scale of the undertaking and remember comrades who marched out with similar confidence but never returned. Mothers clutch children who may themselves one day carry Roman standards into distant lands, while merchants calculate the profits and losses that military expeditions inevitably bring. The economic impact of mobilizing such forces reverberates throughout the empire. As artisans work overtime to meet military demands, farmers sell their surplus to army purchasing agents, and traders reorganize their activities to serve the needs of war rather than peace. The expedition represents not merely a military undertaking, but a massive economic enterprise that touches every aspect of Roman society. As autumn approaches, the great army reaches the shores of Gaul, where the English Channel stretches before them like a grey, restless barrier that has defied Roman power since Julius Caesar first gazed across its waters with similar ambitions. Here, at the edge of the known world, where civilization meets the untamed wilderness of barbarian lands, Caligula establishes his headquarters in a magnificent pavilion that proclaims imperial dignity even in this remote location. The emperor's tent is a marvel of imperial luxury, silk hangings from the distant east depicting scenes of paradise and triumph, silver vessels that catch the light of oil lamps burning the finest oils, and thick carpets that muffle the sound of footsteps, while providing insulation against the damp cold that penetrates even the most elaborate shelters. The pavilion serves not merely as accommodation, but as a symbol of Roman civilization, a demonstration that imperial power can create comfort and beauty, even in the most challenging circumstances. The camp that surrounds the imperial headquarters represents a temporary city, its streets laid out according to Roman military engineering principles, its defenses designed to resist any conceivable barbarian assault. Thousands of tents house soldiers from across the empire, their different origins evident in the subtle variations in equipment and decoration that reflect local traditions within the broader framework of Roman military standardization. You can almost hear the constant whisper of waves against the shore, a sound that becomes the backdrop to all activity in the imperial camp. Day and night, the sea calls to the emperor, sometimes gentle and inviting when morning calm smooths its surface to mirror clarity, other times wild and threatening when storms whip its waters into mountainous waves that crash against the Gallic coast with the sound of thunder. The channel itself presents challenges that few in the imperial entourage had fully anticipated. The waters that separate Gaul from Britain seem to mock the assembled might of Rome, offering passage to those brave enough to challenge their depths while threatening destruction to any who underestimate their power. The sea represents the one enemy that Roman military might cannot simply overwhelm through superior numbers and discipline. Local Gallic fishermen, questioned extensively about channel conditions, provide information that grows more sobering with each conversation. They speak of currents that can carry unwary vessels far from their intended destinations, of storms that arise with terrifying suddenness, of rocks hidden beneath seemingly innocent waters, and of tides that can strand ships far from shore, or sweep them into dangerous waters without warning. The barbarian inhabitants of Britain, according to intelligence gathered from traders and escaped slaves, have spent the summer months preparing for the invasion they know must come. Reports describe massive defensive works being constructed along likely landing sites, warriors gathering from across the island, and druids performing rituals designed to invoke divine assistance against the Roman threat. The element of surprise, crucial to successful amphibious operations, appears to have been lost. But as the weeks pass, something begins to change in the emperor's demeanor, a subtle alteration that those closest to him notice with growing unease. Reports arrive from scouts who have ventured close to the British shores under cover of darkness, tales of fierce warriors painted in blue with dyes that seem to make them immune to fear, of druids who command dark magic that can call down curses upon their enemies, of weather that can turn deadly without warning. These intelligence reports paint a picture of an enemy, unlike any that Roman forces have previously encountered. The British warriors, according to captured prisoners and refugee testimony, fight with a ferocity that makes Germanic tribesmen seem civilized, employing tactics that emphasize individual courage over organized resistance. Their weapons, while primitive by Roman standards, are wielded with skill that has been honed through generations of intertribal warfare. The Druids represent a particular concern to Roman planners, as their influence over British society appears to exceed that of merely religious figures. These mysterious figures are credited with maintaining communication across vast distances, coordinating resistance activities, and inspiring fanatical loyalty that makes British warriors willing to fight to the death rather than accept Roman domination. Their reputed ability to predict weather patterns and invoke supernatural assistance poses challenges that Roman military doctrine has never addressed. The channel itself proves treacherous beyond initial expectations, with currents that have claimed countless vessels and storms that arise from nowhere to dash ships against hidden rocks or sweep them out to sea, where they vanish without trace. Roman naval expertise, developed in the relatively calm waters of the Mediterranean, proves inadequate for conditions that local sailors describe as among the most dangerous in the known world. Picture the emperor standing alone on the beach in the early morning hours, his purple cloak whipping in the salt wind that carries the scent of distant lands and unknown dangers. The weight of expectation presses down upon him like a physical burden. Senators back in Rome who question his judgment and whisper about the costs of his grandiose schemes, soldiers who murmur about the dangers ahead while maintaining the facade of discipline, and the ghost of his predecessor Augustus, who had famously warned against extending the empire beyond its natural boundaries. The political pressures surrounding the expedition have intensified as delays mount and costs escalate. Senate members who initially supported the invasion now send carefully worded messages questioning the wisdom of such extensive commitments in distant territories. The Roman treasury, while vast, is not unlimited, and the expenses of maintaining such a large force far from home are beginning to strain even imperial resources. Military advisors, veterans of successful campaigns throughout the empire, express private concerns about the logistical challenges of supplying an army across such dangerous waters. The single channel that must carry all supplies represents a vulnerability that could prove catastrophic if British naval forces, crude though they may be, managed to disrupt Roman shipping. The army that seemed invincible when assembled in Gaul could quickly become a liability if cut off from reinforcement and resupply. The frustration builds like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, visible from great distances but arriving with irresistible force. Each day brings new challenges, new reasons for delay, that seem to mock the careful planning and massive preparations that have brought the expedition to this point. The weather grows increasingly unpredictable as autumn deepens into winter, with storms that make channel crossing impossible and calms that offer tantalizing opportunities that vanish before preparations can be completed. Supply lines stretch thin across the vast distance from Rome, requiring constant attention to maintain the flow of materials necessary to sustain such a large force in territory that cannot provide adequate local resources. The roads that have made Roman logistics possible throughout the empire reach their limits in this remote region, where every mile of additional distance multiplies the difficulty of maintaining effective communication and supply. Some of his most trusted advisors begin to counsel caution, suggesting in carefully diplomatic language that perhaps the invasion should be postponed until spring brings calmer seas and more favorable conditions. These suggestions, offered with the respect due to imperial authority, nevertheless represent implicit criticism of the emperor's judgment that cuts deeper than any direct challenge to his decisions. The wise course, according to these experienced counselors, would be to use the winter months for additional preparation, gathering more detailed intelligence about British defences, improving equipment for channel crossing, and allowing time for diplomatic initiatives that might reduce the need for costly military action. Their arguments are logical, well-reasoned, and completely at odds with the emperor's burning desire for immediate action and dramatic success. You can sense the growing tension in the imperial camp as Caligula's mood darkens like the skies above the channel, his responses to advisors becoming shorter and more irritable as the gap between his ambitions and the constraints of reality becomes increasingly apparent. The emperor, who had dreamed of easy conquest, now finds himself confronted by the harsh realities of military logistics and the unforgiving nature of the northern seas. His sleepless nights are filled with pacing through the imperial pavilion and bitter reflections on the obstacles that seem to multiply with each passing day. The maps that once excited his imagination now mock him with their depiction of the narrow waters that have become an insurmountable barrier to his hopes for glory. The channel that appeared so insignificant when viewed from Rome has revealed itself as a formidable opponent that cannot be conquered through superior numbers or tactical brilliance. The contrast between imperial expectations and practical limitations creates a psychological pressure that tests the emperor's mental stability in ways that court life had never prepared him to handle. The absolute power that makes his will law throughout the empire proves useless against winds and waves that recognize no human authority, natural forces that have humbled emperors and commoners alike since the beginning of time. The soldiers, too, begin to show signs of strain as the campaign drags on without any apparent progress toward its stated objectives. These men, veterans of campaigns in Germania and along the Rhine where enemies could be fought with sword and shield, find themselves facing an adversary they cannot engage through conventional military means. The sea offers no clear target for their aggression, no fortress to storm, no enemy line to break with the tactics they have mastered through years of training and experience. The psychological impact of inactivity proves more demoralizing than any military defeat could be. Soldiers who have marched across continents to reach this destination now spend their days in endless drill and training exercises that seem increasingly pointless as the prospect of actual combat recedes. The boredom and frustration of military life without purpose begin to undermine the discipline that has made Roman legions invincible in so many previous campaigns. Rumors spread through the camp like disease, growing more elaborate and disturbing with each retelling. Some soldiers whisper that the expedition was cursed from its beginning, that the gods oppose Roman expansion across the sacred waters that separate the civilized world from barbarian lands. Others suggest that British druids have cast spells that make channel crossing impossible, invoking supernatural powers that Roman military might cannot overcome. The cost of maintaining such a massive force grows astronomical with each passing week, as thousands of men consume supplies that must be transported hundreds of miles from their sources. The economic burden of the expedition begins to strain resources throughout the empire, as taxes increase to meet military expenses, while normal economic activity suffers from the diversion of manpower and materials to support the abortive invasion. As winter approaches, the situation becomes increasingly untenable from every perspective: military, political, and economic. The likelihood of successful invasion diminishes with each storm that lashes the coast, while the costs of maintaining the expedition continue to mount without any corresponding progress towards stated objectives. The emperor's credibility, so crucial to maintaining imperial authority, suffers with each day that passes without decisive action. Reports from Britain suggest that the natives have used the extended delay to their advantage, strengthening their defences and gathering their forces for the resistance they know must come. British chieftains have apparently overcome their traditional rivalries to unite against the Roman threat, creating a military challenge that would be formidable even under the best possible circumstances for invasion. The intelligence that reaches the Imperial camp paints a picture of an island preparing for total war, with populations moving inland from vulnerable coastal areas, supplies being cached in hidden locations, and warriors receiving training in tactics specifically designed to counter Roman military advantages. The British response to the invasion threat demonstrates a level of organization and determination that Roman planners had not anticipated. It is in this atmosphere of mounting frustration and thwarted ambition that Caligula begins to exhibit the first signs of the bizarre behavior that would soon shock the Roman world. The emperor, who had once been hailed as a promising young ruler, the heir to a dynasty that had brought unprecedented peace and prosperity to the Mediterranean world, now finds himself trapped by circumstances beyond his control, his grand dreams of conquest seemingly mocked by the very elements themselves. The transformation is psychological as much as behavioral, reflecting the pressure of expectations that no human being could fulfill, combined with the absolute power that prevents anyone from offering the emperor the kind of honest counsel that might help him cope with failure. The isolation of imperial authority, which provides unlimited ability to command obedience, also creates a psychological prison where reality becomes whatever the emperor chooses to believe. Picture the scene on that fateful morning when everything changed, when the accumulated frustrations of months of delay and disappointment finally overwhelmed the last vestiges of imperial restraint. The emperor emerges from his tent to find the sea particularly turbulent, its waves crashing against the shore with unusual violence that seems to echo the turmoil in his own mind. The grey waters stretch to the horizon like a barrier erected by the gods themselves to frustrate human ambition. The channel that had once seemed merely an inconvenience now appears as a conscious opponent, its waters seemingly animated by malevolent intelligence that takes pleasure in thwarting Roman power. The waves that crash against the Gallic shore seem to taunt him, as if Neptune himself were challenging the authority of Rome and mocking the pretensions of a mortal emperor who dared to claim dominion over the sea itself. In this moment of supreme frustration, something snaps in the imperial mind. a psychological breaking point where rational calculation gives way to the kind of desperate thinking that seeks to restore control through increasingly extreme measures. The emperor, who has never known defeat, cannot accept that the natural world might impose limits on his authority, that there might be powers beyond the reach of Roman legions and imperial will. The transformation is subtle at first, a hardening of the emperor's expression, a new intensity in his gaze as he stares out at the churning waters that have become the symbol of everything that stands between him and the glory he believes to be his birthright. But those close to him begin to notice changes in his speech, in the way he speaks of the sea not as a natural obstacle but as a willful enemy, a divine adversary that dares to oppose the will of Rome. The language he uses to describe the channel begins to shift from the practical terminology of military planning to the personal vocabulary of individual combat. The waters become an opponent to be defeated rather than a barrier to be crossed, while the storms that have prevented invasion are characterized as deliberate attacks rather than natural phenomena. The emperor's worldview begins to reshape itself around the need to find some way to achieve victory over forces that cannot be conquered through conventional means. His advisors watch this transformation with growing alarm, recognizing the signs of a mind under pressure that has begun to lose touch with practical reality. The emperor, who once listened to counsel, now speaks primarily of his own authority and the insults he has suffered from both human and divine enemies. The rational discussion of military options gives way to increasingly grandiose declarations about the need to demonstrate Roman power in ways that will cow all opposition. The psychological pressure of command in isolation, combined with the emperor's youth and inexperience with serious setbacks, creates conditions that few human beings could handle without some form of breakdown. The absolute nature of imperial authority, which prevents subordinates from offering honest criticism or realistic assessments, intensifies the emperor's disconnection from reality by ensuring that his increasingly bizarre pronouncements are met with apparent agreement, rather than the challenges that might restore perspective. As our first segment draws to a close, imagine yourself there on that wine-swept beach, watching as the seeds of one of history's most extraordinary episodes begin to take root in the mind of a frustrated emperor. The stage is set for an act of imperial madness that will blur the lines between ambition and insanity, between the possible and the absurd, in ways that will puzzle historians for centuries to come. The emperor stands at the edge of the known world, his purple cloak snapping in the wind, like a banner of defiance against forces that have proven immune to Roman power. Behind him stretch the legions that have conquered nations, while before him lie the waters that have defeated his most cherished ambitions. In the collision between unlimited imperial authority and immutable natural law, something must give way, and the consequences will reverberate through history as an example of what happens when human pride exceeds all reasonable bounds. The morning mist that rises from the channel seems to mirror the confusion that clouds the imperial mind, while the rhythm of waves against shore provides a constant reminder of powers that answer to no human command. In this moment of supreme frustration, as political necessity collides with practical impossibility, the young emperor begins to conceive solutions that will soon astonish the ancient world and provide future generations with one of history's most incredible tales of power, pride, and the dangerous delusions that absolute authority can create in even the most promising of rulers. Chapter 2. Battling the Waves. Let your mind drift now to that extraordinary dawn when the impossible became reality, when the accumulated frustrations of months of delay and thwarted ambition finally crystallized into an act so bizarre that it would be remembered as one of history's most surreal moments. Picture yourself standing among the assembled legions as the first pale light of morning illuminates the coastline of Gaul, that grey hour when night releases its hold on the world, and reality itself seems suspended between darkness and day. The air carries the familiar scent of salt and seaweed, mixed with the metallic tang of armor that has been polished to perfection despite the futility of the campaign, and the earthy smell of thousands of soldiers stirring to wakefulness in their leather tents. These odors, so common to military life, seem somehow different on this morning, charged with the anticipation of events that will transcend all previous experience of warfare. The coastline itself stretches endlessly in both directions, a meeting place between the ordered world of Roman civilization and the chaotic realm of the unconquered sea. Cliffs of grey stone rise from beaches of coarse sand, their faces scarred by centuries of assault from waves that have beaten against them since before Rome was even a collection of huts on 7 hills. Seabirds wheel overhead, their cries adding a wild counterpoint to the more organized sounds of military awakening. The camp awakens slowly, as military camps have done for countless generations across the breadth of the empire. You can hear the soft murmur of voices speaking in the dialects of a dozen provinces, the gentle clink of equipment being prepared by hands that have performed these same rituals in Germania, Syria, Spain, and Egypt. The distant sound of horses nickering in their temporary stables mingles with the creak of leather and the whisper of metal against metal as soldiers prepare for another day of waiting. But this morning carries an unusual tension that seems to permeate the very air, a sense that something unprecedented is about to unfold along this windswept shore that has witnessed so many frustrations and delays. The soldiers can feel it in their bones, that peculiar atmospheric pressure that precedes moments when history pivots on decisions that seem to defy all rational explanation. Veterans who have served through multiple campaigns recognize the signs of impending action, but something in the quality of this particular morning's tension suggests that whatever is about to occur will be unlike anything in their extensive experience. The very silence seems pregnant with possibilities that exceed the normal boundaries of military activity, as if the natural world itself is holding its breath in anticipation of events that will challenge the fundamental assumptions of organized warfare. Imagine yourself watching as Emperor Caligula emerges from his magnificent pavilion, his purple cloak bright as spilled wine against the grey morning light that filters through clouds heavy with the moisture of the channel. There is something profoundly different about him today, a strange intensity in his movements that suggests the culmination of weeks of building pressure, a new quality to his gaze as he surveys the restless waters before him, like a general studying enemy positions. The emperor's appearance, usually maintained with the meticulous care befitting his divine status, shows subtle signs of the strain he has endured. His hair, normally arranged with imperial precision, bears traces of the sleepless night he has spent pacing his quarters and contemplating solutions to the impossible situation in which he finds himself. His eyes, described by court observers as unnaturally bright even in normal circumstances, now burn with an intensity that seems to consume everything they focus upon. The purple cloak that marks his imperial dignity whips in the morning breeze, its fabric a masterwork of Syrian silk, dyed with murex shells, harvested from the distant shores of Phoenicia. The garment represents not merely wealth, but the accumulated power of an empire that stretches from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Yet even this symbol of universal dominion seems inadequate to address the challenge posed by the grey waters that stretch beyond the horizon. The sea stretches endlessly toward that horizon, its surface broken by white-capped waves that seem to dance in deliberate defiance of imperial authority. The waters move with their own rhythm, utterly indifferent to human ambition or divine pretension, following laws that were ancient when Rome was still a pastoral settlement beside the Tiber. Their constant motion creates patterns that shift and change with hypnotic regularity, as if the sea itself were writing messages in a language that mortals cannot comprehend. The emperor's voice carries clearly across the morning air as he addresses his assembled officers, men whose experience spans the breadth of Roman military achievement. But the words they hear are unlike any military order in the annals of Roman history, challenging every assumption they have made about the nature of warfare and the limits of imperial power. Caligula speaks not of ships to be prepared, or troops to be embarked for the invasion of Britain, not of siege equipment to be constructed, or supply lines to be established. Instead, he declares something that seems to emerge from the fevered imagination of a mind pushed beyond the boundaries of rational thought. The sea itself, he announces with the authority of absolute power, has dared to oppose the will of Rome, and Neptune, the god of the ocean depths, has shown himself to be an enemy of the empire who must be dealt with accordingly. The emperor's logic, such as it is, follows a twisted path that makes sense only within the context of unlimited authority confronted by immutable natural law. If the Channel has prevented the invasion of Britain, then the Channel must be acting with deliberate malice. If storms have scattered Roman ships, then the gods of weather must be enemies of Rome. If Neptune controls the sea, then Neptune must be challenged to single combat to settle this dispute once and for all. You can almost feel the bewilderment that ripples through the ranks of hardened centurions and veteran soldiers like a stone dropped into still water. These men have faced Germanic tribes in the dark forests beyond the Rhine, their axes gleaming in the filtered sunlight that penetrates the forest canopy. They have battled Gallic warriors on countless fields, their courage tested against enemies who fought with desperate fury for their homeland's freedom. They have conquered cities whose walls seemed impregnable and subjugated nations whose resistance appeared unbreakable. But never, in all their years of service to Rome, have they been asked to wage war against the very elements themselves. The concept challenges everything their training has taught them about the nature of warfare, the identification of enemies, and the achievement of victory through superior tactics and overwhelming force. How does one defeat an opponent that has no physical form, no command structure to disrupt, no morale to break? The confusion among the officer corps is palpable, a psychological disorientation that spreads through the command structure like a plague. Tribunes exchange glances with centurions, their expressions betraying the uncertainty that protocol forbids them from voicing. Veteran soldiers who have never questioned an order in decades of service find themselves confronted by commands that seem to exist outside the realm of rational military activity. Picture the scene as the emperor's orders are relayed down through the chain of command, each repetition adding new layers of unreality to an already surreal situation. The confusion is palpable. Officers exchange glances that speak volumes about their internal struggle to comprehend what they have been commanded to do. Some wonder if this is some elaborate metaphor, a symbolic gesture that will soon be explained in terms that military minds can understand and execute. Others begin to suspect that their emperor has finally succumbed to the madness that seems to lurk within the imperial bloodline like a hereditary curse, that the pressure of unlimited power combined with frustrated ambition has finally snapped something essential in the imperial psyche. The whispered conversations that pass between trusted comrades carry undertones of concern that extend far beyond the immediate situation to encompass the stability of the empire itself. The hierarchical structure of Roman military organization, designed to ensure instant obedience to commands from superior officers, proves inadequate to process orders that seem to exist outside the normal framework of military logic. Centurions who have built their careers on the ability to translate imperial will into practical action find themselves struggling to understand what practical action could possibly address the emperor's declared war against Neptune. But Caligula's intentions become unmistakably clear as he strides toward the water's edge, with the purposeful gait of a commander approaching the decisive moment of battle. His own sword, a masterwork of steel forged in the workshops of master smiths and decorated with gold inlay that catches the morning light, is drawn and held ready for combat. The blade, designed for fighting against human opponents, seems somehow inadequate for the confrontation that the emperor apparently intends to initiate. The emperor's voice rises above the eternal sound of waves against shore as he hurls challenges at the sea itself, his words carrying across the water with the authority of absolute power. He calls upon Neptune to face him in single combat, daring the god of the depths to show himself worthy of Roman steel, promising consequences for continued defiance that would make the conquest of nations seem like mere diplomatic negotiations. The rhetoric employed by Caligula draws upon the traditional language of Roman military challenge, adapted to circumstances that no previous Roman had ever contemplated. His challenges to Neptune follow the formal protocols of diplomatic confrontation, as if the god of the sea were merely another barbarian chieftain whose submission could be achieved through the proper application of military pressure and imperial authority. The sight is both magnificent and deeply unsettling, a tableau that seems to belong more to legend than to history. Here stands the most powerful man in the world, master of legions that have conquered from Hadrian's Wall to the cataracts of the Nile, ruler of an empire that encompasses most of the known world, engaged in mortal combat with the endless expanse of water that stretches before him like an infinite opponent. His blade flashes as he strikes at the foam-flecked waves, each thrust accompanied by curses and challenges directed at the invisible deity who dares to oppose his will. The technique he employs follows the classical patterns of Roman swordplay, adapted somewhat awkwardly to an opponent that offers no solid resistance. His movements retain the precision of imperial training, even as they serve purposes that transcend any practical consideration. The emperor's form demonstrates the skill that has been drilled into him since childhood, the product of instruction by the finest swordmasters that imperial wealth could employ. His footwork maintains the balance essential to effective combat, while his blade work displays the combinations of thrust and parry that have proven effective against human opponents. The incongruity between technique and target creates a visual paradox that seems to embody the entire situation. Imagine yourself among the soldiers who watch in stunned silence as their emperor demonstrates the proper technique for engaging this aquatic enemy, his instructions shouted over the sound of waves that seem to mock his efforts. The absurdity of the situation is overwhelming, yet none dare to laugh or question the imperial command. The power of absolute authority is such that even the most irrational orders must be obeyed without hesitation, regardless of their apparent impossibility. The discipline that has made Roman legions invincible throughout the known world now serves to ensure compliance with orders that challenge the very foundations of military logic. Soldiers, who have been trained to follow commands without question, find that training tested by circumstances that their instructors could never have anticipated. The psychological pressure of maintaining discipline while executing apparently meaningless orders creates stress that few military situations could equal. The call to arms echoes across the beach as horns sound the advance, their brazen voices carrying the traditional signals that have summoned Roman soldiers to battle for centuries. But this morning, the familiar sounds serve to announce a confrontation unlike any in the annals of warfare, a battle that will be fought according to rules that no military manual has ever attempted to codify. Picture the surreal spectacle, as thousands of Roman soldiers, their armor gleaming in the strengthening sunlight like a metal sea reflecting the sky above, march in perfect formation toward the water's edge. The sight represents the culmination of military organization and training, the product of centuries of evolution in the arts of war, now deployed against an opponent that cannot be defeated through conventional means. The steady tramp of hobnailed boots on wet sand creates a rhythmic counterpoint to the eternal whisper of waves against the shore, the sound of organized human activity imposing itself temporarily upon the chaos of natural forces. Each step drives the iron-shod footwear deeper into sand that shifts and moves beneath the weight of thousands of men, creating temporary impressions that the next wave will erase as if they had never existed. The formations that approach the water maintain the precise spacing and alignment that have characterized Roman military excellence since the days of Marius. Centurions bark commands to maintain intervals and dress ranks, their voices carrying the authority of men who have learned their trade in the crucible of actual combat. The mechanical precision of their movements creates an almost hypnotic effect, as if the legions were performing some elaborate ceremonial dance rather than preparing for battle. You can almost hear the quiet prayers some soldiers whisper to their personal gods, asking for protection not from human enemies, but from the divine wrath they fear their actions might provoke. These invocations reflect the deep-seated Roman belief in the reality of divine power, the understanding that challenging the gods could bring consequences that extend far beyond immediate military considerations. The prayers offered include appeals to Mars for courage in this strangest of battles, to Fortuna for luck in surviving what appears to be an impossible situation, and to the household gods for protection of families who depend upon the soldiers' safe return. Some veterans invoke the spirits of comrades who have fallen in previous campaigns, asking for guidance in dealing with circumstances that no amount of experience has prepared them to handle. Others mutter practical concerns that reflect their training and experience in conventional warfare. How does one properly engage an opponent that has no solid form, no clear boundaries, no vulnerabilities that Roman training has taught them to exploit? The tactical questions that arise have no answers in military doctrine, no precedents in the extensive literature of Roman military strategy. The weapons that have proven effective against every enemy Rome has encountered seem suddenly inadequate for this confrontation. Gladiator designed for close combat, spears crafted for penetrating armor, shields shaped to deflect blows, all appear useless against an opponent that simply flows around whatever obstacles it encounters. The careful maintenance that soldiers have devoted to their equipment seems pointless when that equipment cannot fulfill its intended function. The first ranks reach the water's edge, and, following their emperor's example, begin to thrust their weapons into the churning foam with the mechanical precision that has been drilled into them through years of training. The sight is both tragic and comic. Disciplined soldiers, trained in the art of war by the finest military system the world has ever known, wielding their gladian spears against an enemy that simply flows around their blades, utterly indifferent to their martial skill. The water responds to their assault with the same mindless consistency that has characterized its behavior since the beginning of time. Waves continue their eternal rhythm, unaffected by the steel that penetrates their surface, unchanged by the curses and challenges hurled at their depths. The sea's indifference to human aggression becomes a form of victory more complete than any achieved through resistance or retaliation. Picture the chaos as waves surge higher up the beach, soaking the lower ranks and causing men to stumble backward in formation while trying to maintain the disciplined order that has always been their greatest strength. The sea seems to respond to their assault with increased vigor, as if Neptune himself has taken notice of this unprecedented challenge to his domain and decided to demonstrate the futility of human opposition to divine power. Larger waves crash against the shore, sending spray high into the air where it catches the morning light like scattered diamonds, creating moments of beauty that seem to mock the martial purpose of the soldiers below. The spray soaks equipment that has been carefully maintained and polished, adding insult to the injury of fighting a battle that cannot be won through any application of military skill or courage. The salt water that penetrates everywhere creates practical problems that compound the psychological difficulties of the situation. Leather equipment becomes heavy and uncomfortable, metal begins to show signs of corrosion despite careful maintenance, and the sand that sticks to everything makes movement increasingly difficult. The simple act of maintaining formation becomes a challenge that tests the discipline of even veteran soldiers. Some soldiers attack the water with grim determination, treating this as they would any other military exercise that must be completed, regardless of its apparent purposelessness. They maintain their formation with mechanical precision, advance in measured steps that follow the cadence of their training, and deliver their blows with the technical accuracy that years of practice have ingrained in their muscle memory. Others seem caught between duty and disbelief, their movements mechanical and uncertain as they struggle to comprehend what they have been asked to do, while simultaneously attempting to comply with orders that challenge everything they understand about the nature of warfare. These soldiers represent the majority of the force. Men whose loyalty to Rome remains absolute, but whose ability to process the current situation has been overwhelmed by its fundamental impossibility. Their attacks on the water lack the conviction of their more determined comrades, reflecting the psychological conflict between training that demands obedience and reason that recognizes futility. Their sword work becomes tentative, their formations begin to loosen slightly, and their voices carry none of the war cries that normally accompany Roman assaults. The internal struggle between duty and comprehension creates visible tension in their movements and expressions. The emperor himself remains in the thick of the battle, his purple cloak now heavy with seawater that has soaked through the finest silk to the skin beneath. His carefully arranged hair, normally a symbol of imperial dignity and control, has become disheveled by the salt spray that seems to target him specifically. The transformation from pristine imperial authority to bedraggled warrior adds another layer of surrealism to the already bizarre spectacle. His voice never ceases its stream of challenges and curses directed at the invisible Neptune, promising dire consequences for the god's continued defiance of Roman authority. The threats he hurls at the sea include promises of conquest that would make the subjugation of Gaul seem insignificant, declarations of divine punishment that would exceed anything recorded in mythology, and personal challenges that treat Neptune as merely another enemy chieftain who can be brought to heel through superior force. The emperor's rhetoric draws upon the entire tradition of Roman military oratory, adapted to circumstances that no previous Roman commander had ever contemplated. His challenges to Neptune employ the formal language of diplomatic ultimatums. His threats follow the traditional patterns of military intimidation, and his promises of victory echo the confident declarations that have preceded every successful Roman campaign. You can sense the growing bewilderment among the officers who watch from slightly higher ground, men whose professional lives have been devoted to understanding the strategies and tactics of warfare. These experienced commanders have devoted decades to mastering the complexities of military art, studying the campaigns of great generals, analyzing the factors that determine victory and defeat, and developing the judgment necessary to lead men effectively in combat. Yet here they witness something that defies all logic and precedent, something that challenges every assumption they have made about the nature of organized violence and the achievement of military objectives. Some begin to exchange whispered conversations, wondering if perhaps there is some deeper meaning to this display that they have failed to grasp, some strategic purpose that exceeds their understanding of conventional warfare. The possibility that their emperor possesses knowledge or insight that transcends normal human comprehension offers one explanation for behavior that otherwise appears to be evidence of complete mental breakdown. The divine nature of imperial authority suggests that perhaps Caligula operates according to principles that mere mortals cannot comprehend, that his actions serve purposes that will only become clear when viewed from the perspective of ultimate victory. Others begin to consider more disturbing possibilities, that the pressure of unlimited power combined with the frustration of thwarted ambition has finally broken something essential in the imperial mind, that the man they have sworn to obey has lost the capacity for rational thought that leadership requires. The implications of this possibility extend far beyond the immediate situation to encompass the stability of the empire itself and the loyalty they owe to a ruler who may no longer be capable of effective command. As the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher in the sky, The battle intensifies according to the emperor's increasingly elaborate commands. The emperor orders his troops to advance further into the waves, and the water now reaches the knees of many soldiers, soaking through their equipment and making footing treacherous on the shifting sand beneath their feet. Yet still they continue their assault, driven by the absolute power of Imperial command and the discipline that has been drilled into them since their first day of military service. The surf crashes against their shields with increasing force, soaking their equipment and making movement difficult while creating practical problems that compound the psychological stress of the situation. The bronze and leather that protects them becomes waterlogged and heavy. Their weapons become slippery and difficult to grip, and their footing becomes increasingly uncertain on sand that shifts beneath each wave. Picture the scene as centurions bark orders to maintain formation, even as their men struggle against the pull of the retreating waves that threaten to drag them off balance and destroy the precise spacing that Roman tactics require. The careful discipline of Roman military training attempts to impose order on a situation that is fundamentally chaotic, trying to apply the logic of terrestrial warfare to an enemy that follows no earthly rules. The non-commissioned officers who form the backbone of Roman military organization find themselves in an impossible position, required to maintain standards of performance and discipline while executing orders that appear to serve no purpose that their training has prepared them to understand. Their authority depends upon their ability to translate imperial commands into practical action, but this situation offers no clear path from command to achievement. The psychological impact on the soldiers is profound and far-reaching, affecting men who have faced death in battle without flinching, who have charged enemy lines with unwavering courage, who have endured the hardships of campaign life with stoic determination. But this confrontation with the infinite, with forces beyond human comprehension, tests them in ways that conventional warfare never could, challenging not just their courage but their fundamental understanding of reality itself. The enemy they face cannot be intimidated, cannot be outmaneuvered, cannot be defeated through any application of military science or tactical innovation. The sea responds to their assault with the same indifferent consistency that has characterized its behavior since the beginning of time, utterly unmoved by human ambition or divine pretension. This indifference proves more demoralizing than active resistance could ever be. Some begin to show signs of the strain that accompanies prolonged exposure to impossible situations, nervous laughter that quickly dies away when they remember their circumstances, glances exchanged between comrades that speak of shared disbelief and growing concern, the subtle loosening of formation as individual soldiers struggle to maintain their composure while executing orders that challenge their sanity. The very foundations of military discipline are being tested by this extraordinary command. As soldiers trained to follow orders without question, find themselves questioning not the orders themselves but the reality of the situation in which they find themselves. The psychological disorientation that accompanies this challenge to their fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare creates stress that few military situations could equal. Veterans who have served in campaigns across the breadth of the empire find themselves confronted by an enemy unlike any they have previously encountered. The barbarian tribes they have fought possessed recognizable motivations, employed comprehensible tactics, and could be defeated through the application of superior organization and equipment. But the sea offers no such advantages to Roman military superiority. The emperor's own behavior becomes increasingly erratic as the battle continues, his actions reflecting the mounting pressure of attempting to achieve victory in a situation where victory has no meaning. His attacks on the waves grow more frenzied, his movements more dramatic, his curses more elaborate as he attempts to provoke some response from an opponent that remains utterly indifferent to his challenges. His challenges to Neptune become more personal and vindictive, reflecting the frustration of a mind that cannot accept the existence of powers beyond imperial control. The emperor, who has grown accustomed to seeing his every wish fulfilled through the application of unlimited authority, now confronts a force that recognizes no human sovereignty, acknowledges no mortal dominion, and responds to threats with the same mindless consistency that has characterized its behavior since before Rome existed. The transformation in imperial behavior provides a disturbing spectacle for soldiers who have been trained to regard their emperor as the earthly representative of divine power. The sight of unlimited authority reduced to futile gestures against an indifferent opponent challenges their understanding of imperial dignity and divine favor, creating psychological conflicts that their training has not prepared them to resolve. You can almost feel the salt spray on your face as you witness this unprecedented spectacle, the droplets carrying the taste of the vast ocean that stretches beyond the horizon to lands that Roman maps cannot chart. The morning sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the beach, where Rome's finest soldiers waged their strangest war, creating patterns of light and darkness that seem to shift with each wave that crashes against the shore. The rhythm of their assault creates its own peculiar cadence. The splash of weapons striking water, the scrape of boots on wet sand, the constant whisper of waves that seem to mock their efforts with each retreat and advance. The sound becomes hypnotic, a martial music unlike any that has accompanied Roman victories in the past, a rhythm that speaks of futility rather than triumph. The visual spectacle combines elements of the magnificent and the absurd, in ways that challenge observers' ability to process what they are witnessing. The precision of Roman military formation, the gleam of perfectly maintained equipment, the disciplined movements of trained soldiers, all deployed against an opponent that cannot be impressed by displays of martial prowess or intimidated by demonstrations of overwhelming force. As this segment of our tale draws to a close, imagine yourself there on that ancient beach, watching as the boundaries between sanity and madness, between the possible and the absurd, dissolve like foam on the shore that has witnessed this extraordinary confrontation. The emperor who had dreamed of conquering Britain now finds himself engaged in a battle that no Roman general could ever win, against an enemy that no amount of courage or skill could ever defeat. The sight serves as a monument to the dangerous extremes that unlimited power can reach when confronted by immutable natural law, a demonstration of what happens when human pride exceeds all reasonable bounds and refuses to acknowledge the existence of forces beyond mortal control. The waves that wash against the shore carry no memory of the soldiers who strike at them, no recognition of the imperial authority that commands their submission. The stage is set for even stranger events to unfold, as this war against the sea takes on new dimensions and reveals new depths of imperial eccentricity that will challenge the limits of historical credibility. Let the gentle sound of those ancient waves carry you toward peaceful rest as we prepare to witness the next chapter in this extraordinary tale of power, frustration, and the thin line between ambition and madness that separates rational leadership from the kind of imperial excess that becomes legend. Chapter 3. Spoils of Seashells. Allow your mind to drift now to the most extraordinary moment of this already unprecedented day, when the impossible logic of imperial madness reaches its apotheosis in an act so bizarre that it challenges the very boundaries between reality and fantasy. Picture yourself standing on the sandy shore, as the morning battle against the waves reaches its crescendo, the air thick with salt spray, and the accumulated tension of thousands of men engaged in warfare against an enemy that cannot be defeated through any conventional means. The emperor's voice rises above the crash of surf and the clatter of weapons, but his words carry a new tone, no longer the fury of combat or the frustration of thwarted ambition, but the triumphant declaration of victory that has echoed across battlefields from Germania to Syria. His proclamation cuts through the confusion like a sword through silk, transforming chaos into order through the simple expedient of imperial will, declaring that what cannot be true must nevertheless be accepted as fact. Imagine the sudden stillness that falls over the assembled legions, as Caligula raises his sword high above his head, sea water dripping from the blade like liquid silver in the strengthening sunlight that has witnessed this unprecedented confrontation between unlimited power and immutable natural law. His purple cloak, now heavy with the moisture of his aquatic battle, clings to his frame with the weight of soaked silk that speaks of struggle and ultimate triumph over forces that had dared to oppose Roman authority. The emperor's announcement echoes across the beach, with the authority of absolute power that recognizes no distinction between the possible and the impossible, between the rational and the absurd. Victory, he declares with the confidence of a man who has never been contradicted by mortal voice, has been achieved not through ships or siege engines, not through the conventional instruments of Roman military might, but through the superior courage and discipline of Roman arms applied with unprecedented innovation to an unprecedented enemy. The waves that had seemed so defiant in their endless advance and retreat now appear to move more gently, as if the sea itself has learned to respect the might of the empire and acknowledge the futility of resistance against power that recognizes no limits to its authority. The emperor's interpretation of natural phenomena, as evidence of divine submission, reflects the worldview of absolute authority that sees all events as confirmation of imperial will. You can almost feel the bewilderment that ripples through the ranks of soldiers still standing knee-deep in the churning surf, their equipment heavy with seawater, and their minds struggling to process what their emperor has declared. Victory in battle is something they understand with the clarity born of extensive experience. The moment when enemy lines break under Roman pressure, when resistance crumbles before superior tactics and discipline, when the field belongs to Rome and her eagles soar triumphant over conquered foes. But this triumph over the elements themselves defies their comprehension of what victory means, challenging fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare and the identification of achievable objectives. How does one recognize the defeat of an opponent that has no consciousness to break, no morale to shatter, no leadership structure to decapitate? The questions that arise have no answers in military doctrine or practical experience. The soldier's confusion reflects not merely bewilderment at unusual orders, but a deeper disorientation that accompanies the collision between training that emphasizes rational objectives and commands that seem to exist outside the realm of rational calculation. Their education in the arts of war has prepared them for human enemies with comprehensible motivations, not for conflicts with forces that operate according to laws older than civilization itself. Picture the scene as Caligula strides back toward the dry sand, his movements now carrying the confident swagger of a conquering hero returning from successful campaign. The emperor's gait demonstrates the satisfaction of a commander who has achieved his objectives through superior strategy and personal courage, his posture proclaiming victory to all who witness his approach. The transformation from frustrated ruler to triumphant general appears complete, accomplished through the simple expedient of declaring success where others might see only futility. The emperor's eyes gleam with satisfaction as he surveys his water-soaked legions, seeing in their confused faces the same awe that should greet any Roman general returning from successful campaign against overwhelming odds. His interpretation of their bewilderment as admiration reflects the dangerous isolation that accompanies unlimited power, the inability to distinguish between genuine respect and the careful silence that prudence demands in the presence of absolute authority. The emperor's satisfaction appears genuine, reflecting either supreme confidence in his interpretation of events, or a complete disconnection from reality that allows him to see victory where others recognize only the continuation of natural processes that preceded his birth and will continue long after his death. The distinction between these possibilities becomes irrelevant in the face of imperial authority that demands acceptance rather than understanding. But victory, the emperor declares with the authority of divine mandate, must be commemorated in the traditional manner that honors both the achievement itself and the legacy of Roman military excellence. Every Roman triumph requires spoils of war, tangible proof of conquest that can be displayed before the people and preserved for posterity as evidence of imperial glory. The precedent established by countless previous campaigns demands physical evidence of success that can validate the claims of victory. The question that now presents itself with the urgency of immediate necessity is what constitutes the appropriate trophy from a war waged against the sea itself. What material objects can serve as proof of triumph over an enemy that possesses no conventional wealth to be plundered, no standard to be captured, no crown to be claimed? The problem challenges traditional concepts of military spoils while demanding a solution that satisfies both practical requirements and imperial expectations. The answer, when it comes with the sudden inspiration that marks moments of imperial genius, is delivered with the same authority that had commanded the battle itself. The emperor's solution demonstrates the creative thinking that absolute power can employ when unrestrained by conventional limitations or practical considerations. The declaration that follows will transform the nature of Roman military trophies in ways that no previous commander had ever contemplated. The soldiers are to gather the spoils of their victory, not gold or silver torn from enemy treasuries, not captured weapons that speak of defeated armies, not enemy standards that proclaim the humiliation of opposing forces, but the treasures that Neptune himself has surrendered in defeat. The beaches are littered with the sea god's offerings, tangible evidence of divine submission presented for Roman collection. Shells of every size and description, polished smooth by countless tides and offered now as tribute to Roman power. The emperor's logic, such as it is, follows a twisted path that makes sense only within the framework of unlimited authority confronted by the need to demonstrate success. If Neptune has been defeated, then Neptune must pay tribute. If the sea has submitted to Roman power, then the sea must provide evidence of that submission. The shells that litter every beach become, through imperial interpretation, proof of divine acknowledgement of Roman supremacy. Imagine yourself watching as this new command spreads through the ranks of bewildered soldiers with the same efficiency that characterizes all Roman military communications. The same men who had thrust their swords at waves with mechanical precision now find themselves tasked with a different kind of collection that demands the same organizational skills applied to an entirely different objective. The transition from warriors to gatherers happens with the mechanical precision that marks all Roman military operations, even when those operations defy all logic and precedent. The centurions who relay these orders maintain the same professional demeanor that has characterized their responses to all previous commands, regardless of their private thoughts about the sanity or wisdom of their assignments. Their authority depends upon unquestioning obedience to superior commands, and the unusual nature of current orders does not diminish their obligation to ensure prompt and efficient execution by the men under their command. Picture the surreal beauty of what follows. A spectacle that combines the magnificent organization of Roman military efficiency with objectives that seem to belong more to children's games than to serious martial enterprise. Thousands of legionaries, their armor still gleaming wet from their aquatic battle, begin to spread across the beach in organized search patterns that apply tactical principles to the collection of natural curiosities. The morning sun catches the metal of their equipment as they bend to examine the sand with the same attention to detail that they would devote to searching a battlefield for wounded comrades or valuable equipment. Their movements create a strange choreography of conquest and collection, disciplined formations deployed for purposes that no military manual has ever contemplated, but executed with the same precision that has made Roman arms invincible throughout the known world. The sight represents the culmination of military organization applied to objectives that transcend conventional understanding, a demonstration of how thoroughly Roman discipline can adapt to circumstances that challenge every assumption about the proper employment of military force. The soldiers' ability to maintain formation and follow orders while engaged in activities that seem to mock the very concept of warfare testifies to the depth of their training and the strength of their loyalty. The variety of shells scattered along this ancient coastline is extraordinary, reflecting the diversity of marine life that inhabits the waters beyond the Roman world. You can almost see the soldiers' faces as they discover treasures they had never noticed before, delicate spirals of pink and white that seem too perfect to be natural, smooth ovals that fit perfectly in a palm and warm to the touch, ridged surfaces that catch the light, like natural jewelry crafted by divine hands. Each shell represents a small victory in the emperor's interpretation, a tangible piece of Neptune's domain now claimed for Rome through the superior courage and persistence of her soldiers. The accumulation of thousands of such trophies creates, in imperial logic, proof of conquest more complete than any achieved through conventional warfare. The sea's generosity in providing such abundant spoils becomes evidence of its submission to Roman authority. The natural beauty of these oceanic treasures provides a strange counterpoint to the martial context in which they are being collected. Objects that speak of peaceful tides and gentle currents are transformed into symbols of military conquest, while soldiers trained for destruction find themselves engaged in the preservation of delicate natural artifacts. The irony is lost on participants, but will not escape the notice of future historians. The emperor himself participates in this unprecedented harvest with enthusiasm that appears entirely genuine, his imperial dignity apparently undimmed by the act of gathering seashells like a child at play on some imperial beach. Caligula moves among his troops with the purposeful stride of a commander inspecting his forces, examining their finds with the critical eye of a general evaluating captured enemy equipment for military value and strategic significance. He praises particularly fine specimens with the same attention to detail that he might devote to exceptional weapons captured from defeated enemies, holding them up to the light to admire their natural beauty and declaring them worthy additions to the imperial treasury. His appreciation appears sincere, reflecting either a genuine aesthetic sense or a complete commitment to the fantasy he has created around this bizarre episode. The emperor's personal participation in the collection validates the activity for soldiers who might otherwise question the value of their efforts. His evident satisfaction with their finds encourages greater enthusiasm for the task, while his detailed examination of each offering demonstrates that this activity possesses the same importance as any other military operation conducted under imperial authority. You can sense the growing atmosphere of surreal celebration that begins to permeate the beach as the initial confusion gives way to something approaching genuine enthusiasm for the task at hand. What had started as bewilderment and barely concealed dismay slowly transforms into something approaching festival, as soldiers, perhaps grateful to be engaged in a task that poses no danger to life or limb, begin to approach their collection duties with increasing energy and creativity. The transformation reflects the remarkable adaptability of professional soldiers who have learned to find meaning and satisfaction in whatever tasks their service requires. Men who can transition from farming to fighting can surely adapt to become collectors of oceanic curiosities, especially when their emperor demonstrates personal investment in the success of their efforts. The human capacity for adaptation proves sufficient to encompass even the most unusual circumstances. Picture the scene as centurions organize their men into efficient gathering parties, applying the same tactical principles they would use in any military operation that requires coordination among multiple units operating in the same area. Some soldiers are assigned to work the water's edge, where fresh shells are constantly being deposited by the retreating waves that seem now to cooperate with Roman objectives rather than opposing them. Others move inland, searching among the dunes and rocky outcrops where storms have scattered their treasures over the years, creating deposits that require systematic exploration to discover. The search patterns employed follow established military reconnaissance procedures, ensuring complete coverage of assigned areas while preventing duplication of effort that would waste time and energy. The division of labor reflects the organizational genius that has made Roman military logistics the envy of the civilized world. Each soldier receives specific assignments that contribute to the overall objective while utilizing his particular skills and experience. Veterans with sharp eyes for detail are assigned to examine the most promising locations, while younger soldiers are given broader search areas where enthusiasm can compensate for inexperience. The emperor establishes a collection point, where the finest specimens are to be brought for his personal inspection, creating a command structure that mirrors conventional military operations. A silk pavilion is hastily erected, its bright colors contrasting sharply with the natural tones of sand and sea, creating a focal point that proclaims imperial presence while providing appropriate dignity for the evaluation of oceanic treasures. Within this temporary palace, Caligula holds court over his aquatic treasures with the same serious attention that he might devote to reviewing battlefield reports or diplomatic communications. The pavilion becomes a center of activity where the most significant discoveries are presented for imperial approval, creating a hierarchy of value that elevates the most exceptional finds to the status of major military trophies. The imperial examination of each offering follows protocols that mirror the evaluation of conventional military spoils. Specimens are presented with appropriate ceremony, their distinctive features are pointed out and discussed, and imperial judgment determines their relative value and appropriate disposition. The process transforms random beach debris into carefully catalogued imperial treasures through the application of absolute authority. The soldiers adapt to their new role with the flexibility that marks professional armies throughout history, demonstrating once again the remarkable ability of well-trained troops to find meaning and purpose in whatever tasks their service demands. Men who can transform from farmers to warriors, who can adapt from assault troops to garrison forces, can surely evolve to become collectors of oceanic curiosities when circumstances require such transformation. Soon, techniques are developed for identifying the most valuable specimens, for cleaning sand from delicate surfaces without damaging fragile structures, for protecting fragile finds during transport back to the collection point. The systematic approach reflects the problem-solving skills that military training develops, applied now to challenges that no drill manual has ever addressed, but requiring the same careful attention to detail. Competition develops among units to discover the most impressive specimens, creating the same healthy rivalry that characterizes all aspects of Roman military life. Cohorts begin to take pride in their contributions to the imperial collection, while individual soldiers compete for recognition based on the quality of their finds. The martial spirit that drives Roman military excellence finds new expression in this unprecedented context. You can almost hear the conversations that develop among the troops as they work, their voices carrying the camaraderie that sustained them through campaigns in Germania and Gaul. Veterans share knowledge of previous coastal campaigns, comparing the shells of different regions like merchants discussing the relative merits of various trade goods, their experience providing context for evaluating the significance of current discoveries. Younger soldiers display their finds with the pride of successful hunters, seeking approval from their more experienced comrades while learning to distinguish between common specimens and exceptional discoveries. The mentoring relationships that characterize Roman military culture adapt naturally to this new context, ensuring that knowledge and expertise are shared throughout the force. The discussions that arise reflect the intellectual curiosity that Roman military service has always encouraged. Soldiers speculate about the creatures that once inhabited the shells they collect, debate the forces that shape their forms, and wonder about the distant seas from which some specimens might have traveled. The conversations demonstrate the questioning minds that have made Roman soldiers effective in diverse circumstances throughout the empire. The emperor's own collection grows steadily throughout the morning, expanding with each presentation of exceptional specimens that earn imperial approval. His personal slaves rush back and forth between the beach and the Imperial pavilion, carrying carefully wrapped bundles of shells that have received the ultimate validation of Imperial selection. Each addition to the Imperial collection is catalogued with the same attention to detail that would be given to captured enemy weapons or standards. The Imperial slaves who handle these treasures treat them with the reverence appropriate to objects that have achieved Imperial significance. Their careful wrapping and transport procedures reflect understanding that these shells have been transformed from natural debris into Imperial treasures through the exercise of absolute authority. The transformation demonstrates the power of Imperial will to alter the nature of reality itself. The cataloging process follows established procedures for recording military spoils, with detailed descriptions that note size, color, shape, and distinctive features. The records that result will serve as permanent documentation of this unprecedented victory, providing future historians with evidence of the day when Rome conquered the sea itself through superior courage and determination. Picture the moment when Caligula makes his most significant discovery of the day, a shell of unusual size and perfect formation that catches his imperial eye as he patrols the water's edge with the attention of a general surveying conquered territory. The specimen's exceptional characteristics immediately distinguish it from the thousands of shells already collected, marking it as a trophy worthy of special recognition. The emperor's cry of triumph echoes across the beach as he holds this specimen aloft, his voice carrying the same satisfaction that might accompany the discovery of enemy treasure or the capture of an important prisoner. His declaration that this shell represents Neptune's own crown, surrendered in acknowledgement of Roman supremacy, transforms a natural object into a symbol of divine submission that validates the entire extraordinary enterprise. The shell itself, examined in the bright morning sunlight, displays the kind of natural perfection that seems to justify Imperial enthusiasm. Its spiral structure demonstrates mathematical precision that rivals the greatest works of human artisans, while its surface shows the kind of polish that only centuries of oceanic tumbling could achieve. The object seems designed by nature to serve as an Imperial trophy. The emperor's identification of this shell as Neptune's crown reflects the mythological framework within which he has chosen to interpret the morning's events. In his worldview, divine powers operate according to the same principles as human authority, acknowledging superior force and paying appropriate tribute to their conquerors. The shell becomes tangible proof of divine submission to Imperial will. The psychological impact of this strange victory celebration gradually begins to transform the mood of the entire army in ways that reflect the remarkable adaptability of human nature when confronted by circumstances that challenge conventional understanding. The initial bewilderment that accompanied impossible orders gives way to something approaching genuine satisfaction as soldiers find meaning in their unusual assignment. The transformation occurs gradually, as individual soldiers begin to see their shell gathering as a legitimate form of conquest that will set them apart from all other Roman legions in history. The uniqueness of their achievement begins to compensate for its apparent absurdity, while the emperor's evident satisfaction validates their efforts in ways that conventional military success might not match. The soldiers, trained to find meaning in whatever commands they receive, begin to develop pride in their unprecedented accomplishment. Men who have conquered nations now claim to have conquered the sea itself, an achievement that exceeds anything recorded in military history. The impossibility of their victory makes it, in some strange way, more impressive than conventional triumphs over human enemies. As the day progresses and the sun climbs higher in the sky, the collection assumes an increasingly organized character that reflects the systematic approach that characterizes all Roman military operations. Supply wagons are emptied of their conventional military contents and refilled with carefully sorted shells, their normal cargo of weapons and equipment replaced by oceanic treasures that represent a new form of military spoils. The logistics of this transformation require the same careful planning that supports conventional military operations. Containers must be found or improvised to protect delicate specimens during transport, while space must be allocated according to the relative value of different discoveries. The quartermasters who oversee these arrangements adapt their procedures to accommodate cargo unlike anything they have previously handled. The emperor's personal effects are rearranged to make room for the most precious specimens, his traveling household reorganized to accommodate treasures that have achieved imperial significance through the morning's activities. The imperial baggage train, normally reserved for the luxuries and necessities that accompany imperial travel, now includes objects that speak of victory over divine powers rather than human enemies. Even the cavalry contributes to the effort, their horses' saddlebags now bulging with oceanic treasures that represent their participation in this unprecedented conquest. The mounted troops, normally employed for reconnaissance and rapid movement, find their equipment adapted to serve as transport for delicate cargo that requires careful handling to prevent damage during the journey back to camp. The sight of Roman cavalry, loaded with seashells, rather than conventional military equipment, creates a visual paradox that captures the entire extraordinary nature of the morning's events. Warriors trained for speed and shock action now move carefully to protect cargo that has achieved value through imperial declaration rather than practical utility. The local Gallic population, drawn by curiosity to witness this unprecedented Roman activity, watches in amazement as the world's most disciplined army devotes itself to beachcombing with the same intensity they would bring to storming enemy fortifications. The sight challenges every assumption they have made about Roman military priorities and the nature of imperial ambition. Some brave souls among the local population approach the Roman lines, their initial fear overcome by curiosity about activities that seem to pose no threat to civilian safety. These observers bring their own understanding of coastal life and oceanic treasures, their familiarity with local conditions providing context that Roman soldiers lack despite their enthusiasm for the task. The Gallic observers, experienced in the ways of the sea and familiar with the beaches that the Romans are exploring, begin to offer their own collections of shells in exchange for imperial favor. Their knowledge of local conditions and seasonal patterns enables them to guide Roman collectors toward the most promising locations, contributing to the success of the imperial enterprise, while demonstrating their willingness to cooperate with Roman authority. The emperor graciously accepts these tributes from local residents, praising the wisdom of those who recognize Roman authority over all domains, while acknowledging their contribution to his unprecedented victory. The interaction between imperial forces and local population creates a scene of cooperation that transforms potential observers into participants in the morning's extraordinary events. The acceptance of local contributions serves multiple purposes in the emperor's interpretation of events. It demonstrates that even foreign populations recognize the legitimacy of Roman conquest over Neptune's domain, while their eagerness to contribute validates the value of the treasures being collected. The spontaneous tribute from civilians becomes additional proof of the victory's significance. You can sense the growing momentum of the celebration, as the emperor announces plans for the proper display of these trophies, in ways that will ensure their historical significance receives appropriate recognition. The shells will be transported back to Rome with the same care given to the most valuable military spoils, where they will be exhibited in the Forum as proof of Neptune's defeat and Roman triumph over the forces of nature itself. The plans for displaying the shells in Rome reflect the emperor's understanding of the political importance of demonstrating success to the population of the capital. The Forum, where previous emperors have displayed treasures from conquered territories, will now showcase trophies that represent victory over divine powers rather than human enemies. The unprecedented nature of these spoils will distinguish Caligula's triumph from all previous imperial achievements. The greatest specimens will be preserved in the Imperial Palace, where they will serve as permanent reminders of this unique victory for future generations of Roman rulers. The imperial collection will demonstrate to all visitors that Roman power recognizes no limits, that even the gods themselves acknowledge imperial authority when confronted by superior force and determination. The palace display will follow established protocols for exhibiting military trophies, with each specimen presented in settings that emphasize its significance while educating viewers about the circumstances of its acquisition. The shells will join weapons, standards, and crowns taken from human enemies, their presence testifying to the breadth of Roman achievement across all realms of existence. Picture the final moments of this extraordinary morning as the emperor declares the collection complete, his satisfaction evident in voice and gesture as he surveys the results of his unprecedented campaign. The beach, once littered with shells that spoke only of natural processes, now lies largely bare, its treasures claimed for Rome through the application of imperial will and military discipline. The transformation of the landscape provides visual proof of Roman thoroughness and efficiency. What had been a natural environment shaped by tides and storms has become a harvested field, its resources extracted and organized according to human purpose. The changed appearance of the beach testifies to the impact of Roman organization applied even to the most unusual objectives. The soldiers, their helmets and equipment bags filled with oceanic spoils, stand in formation once more, ready to return to their camp as conquering heroes whose achievement exceeds anything recorded in military history. Their bearing reflects the satisfaction of men who have completed their mission successfully, regardless of its unprecedented nature or apparent impossibility. The ranks that had advanced into the surf hours earlier, as confused soldiers following incomprehensible orders, now withdraw as veterans of a unique campaign that has added new meaning to the concept of Roman military achievement. Their experience has transformed them from ordinary legionaries into participants in events that will be remembered long after conventional victories have been forgotten. The emperor's satisfaction is evident as he surveys his shell-laden legions, seeing in their unusual burden the proof of Roman power over all creation. His interpretation of the morning's events as a military triumph validates not only his personal authority, but the broader imperial claim to dominion over all realms of existence, from the depths of the earth to the heights of heaven. The transformation is complete. What had begun as a failed invasion of Britain has become something entirely unprecedented, a victory over the very forces of nature, commemorated not with gold or silver torn from enemy treasuries, but with the humble gifts of the sea itself. The emperor's ability to transform failure into triumph through the exercise of unlimited authority demonstrates the power of imperial will to reshape reality according to its own requirements. The conceptual framework that allows a collection of seashells to represent military victory reflects the broader imperial worldview that recognizes no distinction between the possible and the necessary. If Rome requires victory, then victory must be achieved, regardless of the conventional limitations that might constrain lesser powers. The shells become proof that imperial authority can prevail even against opponents that conventional wisdom would consider undefeatable. As this segment draws to a close, imagine yourself there on that transformed beach, watching as the last of the shells are carefully packed away with the attention to detail that would be devoted to the most precious military spoils. The morning sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across sand that has witnessed one of history's most unusual military operations, its surface now bearing the marks of Roman organization rather than natural processes alone. The gentle rhythm of waves continues unchanged, their eternal advance and retreat unaffected by human interpretation of their meaning or imperial claims to authority over their domain. But in the emperor's worldview, they now whisper of submission rather than defiance, their sound transformed from mockery to acknowledgement through the exercise of unlimited power and creative interpretation. Let the peaceful sound of those ancient waters carry you toward rest as we prepare to explore the final chapter of this extraordinary tale, the reactions and interpretations that would echo through the centuries, as historians, philosophers, and common citizens struggled to understand the meaning of the day when Rome conquered the sea itself, through the simple expedient of declaring victory and collecting seashells as proof of divine submission to imperial authority. Chapter 4. Myth or Madness. Let your thoughts drift now across the vast expanse of time and space, from that extraordinary beach in Gaul where impossible events unfolded in the grey dawn light, to the marble halls of Rome, where news of the emperor's unprecedented victory begins to spread through the corridors of power, like ripples on a still pond disturbed by a stone dropped from impossible heights. Picture yourself among the senators, merchants, and citizens who gather in the forum to hear the first whispered reports of what has transpired on the distant shores of the empire, their faces reflecting the confusion and uncertainty that accompanies news that challenges the very foundations of rational understanding. The journey of this news across the Roman world follows the established networks of imperial communication, carried by the same messengers who have brought word of victories in Germania, conquests in Britannia, and triumphs throughout the Mediterranean world. Yet the content of their messages defies every category that Roman administrative experience has developed for processing information about military campaigns and imperial achievements. Imagine the scene in the Senate House as the official dispatches arrive, carried by swift messengers who have ridden hard from the northern frontier, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces bearing the gravity that accompanies bearers of momentous news. The scroll-bearers approach with the formal dignity that marks all imperial communications, their carefully neutral expressions masking whatever private thoughts they might harbor about the extraordinary nature of their burden. The setting itself speaks of the accumulated wisdom and dignity of centuries of Roman governance. The Senate House, with its marble columns and elaborate decorations celebrating the achievements of the Republic and early Empire, provides a backdrop of traditional authority that makes the content of the emperor's message seem even more surreal. The bronze plaques commemorating conventional military victories line the walls, their familiar litany of conquered peoples and captured cities, creating an ironic commentary on the unprecedented nature of the current report. The reading of the emperor's report unfolds with all the ceremonial gravity that surrounds official pronouncements, the formal language of imperial dispatch providing a veneer of normalcy to events that transcend all previous experience. Caligula's own words echo through the marble chamber, describing his great victory over Neptune and the sea, the successful subjugation of aquatic forces that had dared to oppose Roman will, and the magnificent spoils now traveling toward the capital as proof of this unprecedented conquest. The language employed in the imperial dispatch follows the traditional formulas that have been used to describe Roman victories since the days of the Republic, yet applied to circumstances that those formulas were never designed to address. Terms like enemy forces, strategic objectives, and complete victory take on new meanings when applied to warfare against the sea itself, creating a linguistic paradox that mirrors the conceptual challenges posed by the emperor's actions. You can almost feel the stunned silence that follows the completion of the reading, a quiet so profound that it seems to drain the very air from the chamber. These are men who have witnessed the rise and fall of emperors, who have seen the empire expand across continents and subdue nations that once seemed unconquerable, who have grown accustomed to the extraordinary achievements of Roman arms in every corner of the known world. Yet, never have they heard of anything quite like this. A war waged against the very elements themselves, victory declared over forces that exist beyond the realm of human conflict, spoils gathered from an enemy that possesses neither consciousness nor the capacity for surrender. The cognitive dissonance created by this report challenges their ability to process information according to the categories their experience has established. The senators' faces become studies in diplomatic restraint as they struggle to maintain appropriate expressions while their minds race to comprehend what they have heard. Years of service in imperial administration have taught them the dangers of displaying inappropriate reactions to imperial communications, regardless of their content. The survival instincts honed by decades of navigating the complexities of court politics warn against any display of disbelief, mockery, or even excessive surprise. Picture the careful expressions that mask the senators' true thoughts as they wrestle with the implications of what they have witnessed. The formal protocols of senatorial behavior provide a framework for responding to the unprecedented, allowing them to maintain dignity while their understanding of reality undergoes fundamental revision. The ability to preserve composure in the face of the impossible becomes a crucial political skill. The initial reactions divide along predictable lines that reflect both personal temperament and political calculation. Some senators, perhaps those with the deepest understanding of the emperor's increasingly erratic behavior, interpret the reports as evidence of divine favor. Surely only a ruler blessed by the gods could achieve such impossible victories. This interpretation offers the comforting possibility that events beyond human comprehension might nevertheless possess divine logic. Others, more skeptical but equally cautious, search for hidden meanings in the emperor's actions, wondering if perhaps this strange campaign serves some deeper strategic purpose that lesser minds cannot grasp. The possibility that imperial genius operates on levels beyond normal understanding provides an alternative explanation that preserves both respect for imperial authority and faith in rational causation. Still others begin to contemplate more disturbing possibilities, that the emperor's behavior represents evidence of mental instability that threatens not only his own welfare, but the stability of the empire itself. These thoughts, however, remain carefully unspoken, as the political consequences of questioning imperial sanity could prove fatal to those brave enough to voice such concerns. You can sense the undercurrents of whispered conversation that begin to flow through the Roman elite, as word of the shell gathering spreads beyond the confines of the Senate House. In the baths where political gossip mingles with the steam of heated pools, in the markets where merchants gather to discuss the implications of imperial policy for their commercial interests, in the private dining rooms where the wealthy gather to analyze the affairs of state over wine and delicacies from across the empire, the same questions arise again and again with increasing urgency. What does this behavior mean for the stability of imperial governance? How should rational individuals respond to irrational commands? What precedent do these events establish for the exercise of absolute power? The discussions that emerge reflect the deep unease that accompanies the recognition that their fate depends upon the decisions of a man whose mental state has become a matter of legitimate concern. The conversations that take place in these various venues reflect the social stratification of Roman society, with different classes approaching the emperor's behavior from perspectives shaped by their own circumstances and concerns. Wealthy patricians worry about the political implications, merchants focus on economic consequences, while common citizens express bewilderment at events that seem to exist outside their normal frame of reference. The emperor's own return to Rome provides no immediate answers to these mounting questions, instead raising new concerns about the direction of imperial policy and the emperor's understanding of his role and responsibilities. Picture the extraordinary triumph that Caligula stages for his victory over the sea, a procession unlike any in Roman history, featuring not captured enemies or looted treasures, but cartloads of carefully displayed seashells rolling through the streets of the capital on wagons normally reserved for the most precious spoils of conventional warfare. The triumph itself follows traditional Roman protocols, adapted to unprecedented circumstances, creating a spectacle that combines familiar elements with innovations that challenge observers' ability to process what they are witnessing. The route through the city follows the same path used by victorious generals throughout Roman history, yet the cargo being displayed defies every category that Roman experience has established for understanding military spoils. The crowds that gather to witness this spectacle watch in bewildered silence as the spoils of an impossible war pass before their eyes, their expressions reflecting the confusion that accompanies the collision between expectation and reality. Citizens who have witnessed the triumphs of Germanicus, the victories of Tiberius, and the achievements of previous emperors find themselves confronting a display that transcends their understanding of what military victory represents. The shells themselves, carefully arranged in elaborate displays that emphasize their beauty and rarity, create a visual paradox that embodies the entire extraordinary episode. Objects that speak of peaceful tides and natural processes are presented as evidence of martial triumph, while the delicate beauty of their forms contrasts sharply with the violent imagery normally associated with military spoils. The imperial palace itself becomes a monument to aquatic conquest as the finest shells are arranged in elaborate displays throughout the imperial residence, transforming familiar spaces into galleries devoted to the emperor's unprecedented achievement. Visitors find themselves confronted by glass cases containing what the emperor proudly describes as Neptune's surrendered crown jewels, delicate spirals and perfect ovals that catch the light like captured fragments of the sea itself. The transformation of the palace reflects the emperor's complete commitment to his interpretation of events, as public spaces that once displayed conventional symbols of imperial power now showcase evidence of victory over divine forces. The juxtaposition between traditional imperial regalia and oceanic curiosities creates an atmosphere that challenges visitors' ability to maintain their composure while navigating the complex requirements of court etiquette. Imagine yourself among the court officials who must navigate this new reality with all the diplomatic skill their positions require, their professional survival dependent upon their ability to adapt to circumstances that defy conventional understanding. The emperor's enthusiasm for his oceanic trophies proves boundless, and imperial etiquette demands that guests admire each specimen with appropriate awe, regardless of their private thoughts about the emperor's mental state. Elaborate rituals develop around the viewing of particular shells, with Caligula himself serving as guide and interpreter for their symbolic significance in ways that transform casual visits into religious experiences. The emperor's detailed explanations of each specimen's importance create obligations for listeners to respond with appropriate reverence, while their inability to understand the significance being described tests their diplomatic skills to their limits. The court ceremonies that emerge around the shell collection reflect the emperor's ability to transform personal obsessions into imperial policy through the exercise of absolute authority. What begins as individual eccentricity becomes, through imperial mandate, a new form of state religion that requires participation from all who seek imperial favor or hope to avoid imperial displeasure. The broader implications of the emperor's behavior begin to manifest in subtle but significant ways throughout the empire, as administrators struggle to incorporate evidence of impossible victory into their reports and communications. Military commanders find themselves walking a careful line between their professional understanding of warfare and the need to acknowledge their emperor's unique achievements without compromising their credibility with subordinates. Regional governors face the challenge of explaining imperial policy to local populations who lack the context necessary to understand why their emperor would wage war against the sea. The task of maintaining imperial dignity while implementing policies that seem to defy rational explanation tests the administrative skills of even the most experienced provincial officials. Diplomatic correspondence takes on new complexity, as foreign rulers struggle to comprehend reports of Rome's war against the sea, their confusion evident in communications that attempt to respond appropriately to claims that exceed their understanding. Allied kings and client rulers find themselves required to acknowledge Roman victory over Neptune while privately questioning the mental stability of their imperial patron. The international implications of the emperor's behavior create diplomatic challenges that extend throughout the Roman sphere of influence. Foreign courts must decide how to respond to communications that describe impossible victories, while their own advisors struggle to understand whether these reports should be interpreted literally, symbolically, or as evidence of Roman political instability. You can almost hear the conversations that must have taken place in the private chambers of the imperial palace, where freedmen and advisors who had served the emperor since his youth wrestled with the growing evidence of his departure from conventional behavior. These men, who had witnessed his transformation from promising young prince to absolute ruler, now found themselves confronting signs of a deeper change that defied their understanding and threatened their ability to provide effective counsel. The household staff who attended the emperor most closely possessed the most intimate knowledge of his behavior, yet their dependent status made it impossible for them to address their concerns directly. Their observations of imperial conduct, while potentially crucial for understanding the emperor's mental state, remained confined to whispered conversations among themselves, creating a reservoir of concern that could not be openly expressed. The emperor's personal physicians and attendants faced particular challenges in reconciling their professional responsibilities with the political realities of imperial service. Their medical training might suggest certain interpretations of the emperor's behavior, yet their positions depended upon maintaining imperial favor rather than providing honest medical assessment. The tension between professional obligations and personal survival created moral dilemmas that had no clear resolution. The historical record itself begins to reflect the confusion and uncertainty that surrounded these events, as scribes and chroniclers struggled to fulfill their obligations to document imperial activities while preserving their own safety and credibility. Contemporary chroniclers, trained to record the deeds of emperors with appropriate gravity and respect, find themselves challenged by a story that seems to transcend the boundaries of credible historical narrative. Some choose to record the emperor's actions with careful neutrality, presenting the facts without interpretation or judgment in ways that allow future readers to draw their own conclusions. This approach preserves the chronicler's professional integrity while avoiding the dangerous territory of imperial criticism, yet it creates historical documents that raise more questions than they answer. Others attempt to provide context that might help readers understand the emperor's behavior, drawing upon philosophical or religious frameworks that could accommodate events that seem to defy rational explanation. These efforts to make sense of the impossible often reveal more about the chronicler's own worldview than about the events they attempt to describe. Picture the scholars and philosophers who attempt to make sense of the emperor's behavior through the lens of Roman understanding of divine authority and imperial power. Their intellectual frameworks stretched to accommodate events that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Some argue that Caligula's actions represent a new form of religious revelation, a direct communication with the gods that lesser mortals cannot comprehend but must nevertheless respect. The philosophical implications of the emperor's behavior create debates that extend far beyond the immediate political consequences, touching upon fundamental questions about the nature of authority, sanity, and the relationship between human will and divine power. Academic discussions in schools and libraries attempt to place these events within existing frameworks of understanding, yet the unprecedented nature of the emperor's actions resists easy categorization. Religious authorities face particular challenges in interpreting events that seem to involve direct interaction between mortal and divine powers. The emperor's claims of victory over Neptune raise theological questions about the nature of divine authority and the limits of human power that have no clear answers within existing religious doctrine. The development of new interpretations requires careful navigation of both theological and political considerations. Others suggest that the emperor's victory over the sea demonstrates the ultimate extent of Roman power, authority so absolute that it extends even over the forces of nature, transforming the impossible into the inevitable through the exercise of unlimited will. This interpretation elevates the emperor's actions to cosmic significance while preserving faith in the rationality of imperial power. The political theorists who grapple with these events find themselves confronting questions that challenge the very foundations of their understanding of governmental authority. If an emperor can declare victory over the sea and make that declaration reality through the exercise of absolute power, what limits exist on imperial authority? The implications for constitutional theory and political philosophy prove as disturbing as they are fascinating. The psychological impact on the emperor himself becomes increasingly apparent as the months pass following his return to Rome, his behavior suggesting that the success of his impossible campaign has convinced him that he has transcended the normal limitations of human authority. The victory over Neptune appears to have validated his belief in his own divine nature, encouraging increasingly grandiose claims and demonstrations of power that push the boundaries of what even absolute rule can accomplish. The emperor's subsequent behavior grows ever more erratic, marked by claims of divine status that extend far beyond the traditional deification accorded to deceased emperors. His interactions with the shell collection become increasingly ritualized, suggesting a religious significance that transcends their original value as military trophies. The objects that once represented victory over the sea now seem to serve as focal points for imperial devotions that blur the line between political authority and religious worship. The evolution of the emperor's relationship with his oceanic trophies provides insight into the psychological processes that may have driven his original decision to wage war against the sea. What began as frustrated ambition transformed into impossible victory, which then evolved into evidence of divine favor, creating a feedback loop that reinforced the emperor's growing disconnection from conventional reality. You can sense the growing tension within the imperial court, as those closest to the emperor begin to recognize the dangerous trajectory of his mental state, their concern evident in the careful attention they pay to his words and actions. The shell collection, once a source of imperial pride and court celebration, becomes a symbol of something far more troubling, evidence of a mind that has lost touch with the fundamental distinctions between the possible and the impossible, between human ambition and divine authority. The courtiers, who must interact with the emperor on a daily basis, find themselves walking an increasingly narrow path between the requirements of imperial etiquette and the preservation of their own sanity. The need to treat seashells as precious treasures, to discuss impossible victories as historical fact, and to participate in rituals that seem to exist outside the realm of rational behavior, creates psychological stress that compounds the political dangers of their positions. The isolation that accompanies absolute power becomes increasingly evident, as the emperor's behavior separates him from any meaningful contact with reality or honest counsel. The very mechanisms that protect imperial authority from criticism also prevent the kind of intervention that might address the emperor's obvious mental deterioration, creating a situation where unlimited power becomes a prison that traps both ruler and ruled. The broader Roman world begins to adapt to this new reality with the pragmatic flexibility that has always marked the empire's response to changing circumstances, regardless of how extraordinary or unprecedented those changes might be. If the emperor claims victory over the sea, then victory over the sea it must be, regardless of individual beliefs about the possibility or meaning of such achievement. The administrative machinery of empire proves remarkably capable of incorporating impossible claims into routine bureaucratic procedures, as officials throughout the Roman world develop protocols for acknowledging imperial victory over Neptune, while maintaining the practical functions of government. The capacity for bureaucratic adaptation demonstrates the resilience of institutional structures, even when confronted by leadership that operates outside conventional boundaries. If seashells are to be treated as treasures more valuable than gold, then the appropriate rituals and ceremonies must be developed to honor them properly, regardless of personal opinions about their actual worth. The transformation of worthless objects into imperial treasures through the exercise of absolute authority demonstrates the power of political will to reshape economic and social values according to its own requirements. The provincial administrators, who must implement these requirements, face challenges that test their diplomatic skills and political judgment to their limits. The need to maintain imperial dignity while explaining policies that seem to defy rational explanation requires a level of bureaucratic creativity that exceeds normal administrative demands. Their success in navigating these challenges demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of Roman governmental institutions. The local populations who witness these displays of imperial policy struggle to understand the significance of events that seem to exist outside their normal frame of reference. The sight of Roman officials treating seashells as precious treasures challenges their understanding of imperial power, while raising questions about the mental state of their distant ruler that they dare not voice openly. The cultural impact of the emperor's actions extends throughout Roman society as artists, poets, and craftsmen attempt to incorporate the story of victory over Neptune into their work. The challenge of celebrating impossible achievement while maintaining artistic credibility creates new forms of creative expression that blur the boundaries between history and mythology, between factual account and symbolic representation. The question that haunts all who witness these events, whether directly or through the reports that spread throughout the empire, is whether they are observing the actions of a man touched by divine inspiration, or the gradual descent of absolute power into absolute madness. The answer perhaps lies not in the events themselves, but in the eye of the beholder, in the eternal human struggle to distinguish between the visionary and the delusional. between the breakthrough and the breakdown. The theological implications of this question extend far beyond academic speculation, as the emperor's claims of divine favor and miraculous victory challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between human and divine authority. If Caligula's victory over the sea represents genuine divine intervention, then traditional understanding of imperial power requires fundamental revision. If it represents evidence of mental illness, then the implications for imperial legitimacy prove equally disturbing. The political consequences of this uncertainty create instability that extends throughout the Roman governmental system, as officials struggle to navigate between competing interpretations of imperial behavior. The need to maintain loyalty to an emperor whose sanity has become questionable creates moral and practical dilemmas that have no clear resolution within existing frameworks of law and custom. As the years pass, and the emperor's behavior becomes increasingly erratic, marked by additional claims of divine status and demonstrations of power that exceed even his victory over the sea, the shell collection takes on new meaning for those who remember that strange day on the beaches of Gaul. What had seemed like an isolated episode of imperial eccentricity now appears as the first clear sign of a deeper transformation, the moment when the line between emperor and madman began to blur beyond recognition. The retrospective analysis of the emperor's behavior reveals patterns that suggest the shell-gathering episode was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger psychological process that had been developing over months or years. The transformation from frustrated ruler to self-proclaimed god appears to have accelerated following his impossible victory over Neptune, suggesting that success in achieving the impossible may have convinced him that no limits existed on his authority. The historical debates that would rage for centuries begin even during Caligula's lifetime, as observers struggle to understand not just what happened on that beach, but what it revealed about the nature of power, authority, and the human psyche under extreme pressure. Some see in the emperor's actions a symbolic rejection of the limitations that constrain ordinary mortals, a literal attempt to conquer the unconquerable as an expression of unlimited human will. This interpretation views the emperor's behavior as the logical extension of imperial authority pushed to its ultimate conclusion, the final demonstration of power that recognizes no boundaries or constraints. From this perspective, Caligula's victory over the sea represents not madness, but the ultimate achievement of absolute authority, the transcendence of normal human limitations through the exercise of unlimited will. Others interpret the events as evidence of the corrupting influence of absolute power, the inevitable result of placing unlimited authority in the hands of a single individual without adequate checks or balances. The shells themselves become symbols of this corruption, beautiful objects that represent the transformation of reasonable ambition into dangerous delusion, the moment when power exceeds the capacity of human nature to handle it responsibly. The moral implications of this interpretation extend beyond the immediate circumstances of Caligula's reign to encompass broader questions about the nature of governmental authority and the limits that should be placed on individual power. The emperor's ability to transform impossible claims into accepted reality through the exercise of absolute authority serves as a warning about the dangers of unlimited power, regardless of the personal qualities of those who wield it. The moral implications of this interpretation extend beyond the immediate circumstances of Caligula's reign to encompass broader questions about the nature of governmental authority and the limits that should be placed on individual power. The emperor's ability to transform impossible claims into accepted reality through the exercise of absolute authority serves as a warning about the dangers of unlimited power, regardless of the personal qualities of those who wield it. Picture the moment, perhaps, when some future historian sits in a quiet library, surrounded by scrolls and documents that preserve the fragmentary record of these extraordinary events, trying to piece together the truth of what happened on that distant beach. The physical evidence will be clear, the shells themselves, carefully preserved in the Imperial collection, tangible proof that something extraordinary occurred on the shores of Gaul. But the meaning of that evidence will remain as elusive as the truth about the human heart itself, as challenging to interpret as the motives that drive men to seek impossible victories over unconquerable enemies. The historian's task of reconstructing not just events but their significance will require navigation between competing explanations that reflect as much about their proponents as about the emperor whose behavior they attempt to understand. The documentary sources that survive will provide conflicting accounts shaped by the political necessities of their authors, the temporal distance from events, and the interpretive frameworks available to contemporary observers. The challenge of distinguishing between factual reporting and symbolic representation will complicate any attempt to understand what actually occurred and what it meant to those who witnessed it. The archaeological evidence, the shells themselves, the remains of the Imperial palace where they were displayed, the ruins of the structures built to house them, will offer tantalizing hints about the physical reality of the emperor's obsession, while remaining silent about the psychological processes that created it. The gap between material evidence and psychological understanding will ensure that the mystery of Caligula's war against the sea remains perpetually open to new interpretation. The literary sources that preserve accounts of these events will reflect the same confusion and uncertainty that characterized contemporary responses, as authors struggle to find language adequate to describe experiences that transcend normal categories of understanding. The tension between the need to document extraordinary events and the limitations of conventional narrative techniques will create texts that blur the boundaries between history and legend. As this segment of our tale draws to a close, imagine yourself standing once more on that ancient shore, where the waves continue their eternal rhythm, indifferent to the claims of emperors and the interpretations of historians who seek to understand what it means when unlimited power confronts immutable natural law. The beach has returned to its natural state, unmarked by the extraordinary events that once transformed it into a battlefield between human ambition and divine authority. The physical landscape preserves no trace of the morning, when Roman legions waged war against the sea, when thousands of soldiers followed impossible orders with the discipline that made them masters of the known world. The sand that once bore the footprints of men engaged in impossible combat has been reshaped by countless tides, while the waters that witnessed Imperial victory over Neptune continue their ancient patterns without memory of human claims to authority over their domain. Yet the questions raised by that extraordinary morning persist with the same relentless rhythm as the waves themselves, challenging each generation of observers to grapple with the mystery of what happens when absolute power confronts absolute impossibility. The emperor who fought the sea has become part of the eternal story of human nature itself, a reminder that the line between genius and madness, between the possible and the impossible, remains as shifting and elusive as the tides themselves. Let the gentle sound of those timeless waters carry you toward peaceful rest, knowing that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some truths too complex for simple explanation. The waves that wash against countless shores throughout the world continue their eternal conversation with the land, speaking in languages older than human speech, about forces that transcend the brief ambitions of mortal rulers, yet they carry within their rhythm the memory of a day when one man's impossible dream briefly transformed the nature of reality itself through the simple expedient of declaring victory, where others saw only the endless futility of human ambition, confronting the immutable laws of nature. As our journey through this extraordinary tale draws to its gentle close, let your mind drift back across the centuries to that windswept beach in Gaul, where the impossible became reality, and the boundaries between ambition and madness dissolved like foam on the shore. The waves that witnessed Caligula's unprecedented war continue their eternal rhythm, unchanged by the brief moment when human will challenge the forces of nature itself. Picture yourself now in the quiet comfort of your own time, surrounded by the safety and security that distance from such tumultuous events provides. The warm bed that embraces you, the roof that shelters you from the elements, the peaceful silence that allows your thoughts to wander. All of these simple comforts would have seemed like unimaginable luxury to those Roman soldiers who found themselves thrust into history's strangest military campaign. The emperor who declared war on the sea has long since returned to dust, his purple robes faded, his imperial palace crumbled, his impossible victories forgotten by all but the most dedicated students of history. Yet something of his story lingers in the collective memory of humanity, a reminder that the human spirit, in all its complexity and contradiction, remains capable of actions that transcend the boundaries of rational explanation. Perhaps there is comfort in knowing that even in the ancient world, even at the height of Roman power and organization, there were moments when the carefully constructed order of civilization gave way to something far more mysterious and unpredictable. The same forces that drove Caligula to challenge Neptune, ambition, frustration, the desperate need to prove one's worth, continue to shape human behavior in ways both great and small. You can almost hear the whisper of those ancient waves as they remind us that some victories are more symbolic than real, that some battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the limitations of our own understanding. The shells that once represented imperial triumph now lie scattered on beaches around the world, beautiful in their simplicity, unmarked by the grand meanings that human minds once attributed to them. The soldiers who gathered those oceanic treasures returned to their normal lives, carrying within them the memory of a day when the impossible became routine, when military discipline was applied to the fundamentally absurd task of conquering the unconquerable. Perhaps some of them in their later years would look back on that strange morning as the moment when they learned that reality itself is more flexible than they had ever imagined. Consider the profound peace that comes from accepting the mysteries that surround us, from acknowledging that not all questions have clear answers, that not all stories end with tidy resolutions. The Emperor's war against the sea remains exactly what it was, an event so extraordinary that it challenges our understanding of what is possible, what is meaningful, and what is true. The gentle rhythm of your breathing now mirrors the eternal pattern of those Roman waves, the steady pulse of life that connects you to all who have come before and all who will come after. In this moment of quiet reflection, you are part of the same human story that included Caligula and his bewildered soldiers, the same ongoing narrative of hearts and minds seeking meaning in an often incomprehensible world. Let yourself drift now toward the peaceful shores of sleep, knowing that the sea continues its ancient song, indifferent to human claims of victory or defeat, offering its gifts freely to all who walk along its margins. The shells that once symbolized imperial conquest now return to their natural beauty, reminders that some treasures are valuable, not for the meanings we assign to them, but for their simple existence in the vast tapestry of creation. The Emperor, who fought the sea god, has become part of the eternal rhythm of storytelling itself, a tale that will continue to be told as long as humans gather to share the strange and wonderful events that have shaped our collective journey. His story reminds us that even in our most rational moments, we remain capable of actions that defy explanation, of dreams that transcend the boundaries of the possible. As you surrender to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine yourself standing on that ancient beach one final time, watching as the last light of day fades over the water, where Romans once battled waves and gathered shells in the name of impossible victory. The sea accepts all offerings, the prayers of emperors and the dreams of common soldiers, the grand ambitions of the powerful and the quiet hopes of the ordinary. Rest now in the knowledge that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some stories to be experienced rather than understood. The Emperor's war against the sea continues to echo through time, a reminder that the human spirit, in all its complexity and contradiction, remains the most unpredictable force in the universe. Let the timeless whisper of those waves carry you into peaceful dreams, where the impossible becomes possible, where shells shine like jewels in the morning light, and where the rhythm of the sea beats in harmony with the rhythm of your own heart. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow will bring new mysteries to ponder, new stories to explore, and new moments of wonder in the endless human journey through time. The Emperor who challenged the gods has found his own peace at last, and now it is your turn to rest, cradled by the same forces that have comforted countless generations before you. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle sound of waves on an ancient shore, where history and legend meet in the twilight between waking and sleeping.